Silke Hemming. Dr. Silke Hemming studied horticultural sciences at the University of Hanover, Germany. She's received her PhD in horticultural sciences at the University of Hanover in 1998. Since 1999, she has worked at the Wageningen University and Research Center in various capacities, currently leading the research team of greenhouse technology. Hemming is an expert in the field of novel greenhouse design concepts and modern greenhouse coverings, and has worked in projects in different climate zones worldwide. Her team has expertise on the field of energy saving, greenhouse climate, water saving, modeling, data science, computer vision, sensors, and robotics for greenhouse and indoor farming applications. She recently initiated research in the field of artificial intelligence and greenhouse controls, and led 2 international challenges on autonomous greenhouses.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some of our research with you, and particularly I would like to tell you something about our second autonomous greenhouse challenge and the results we obtained over there and the lessons learned from such an experiment. Let me see. Why do we need autonomous greenhouses? Well, companies in greenhouse business are getting larger and larger. You have very large compartments, or sometimes in different locations. And we see internationally, there is a lack of skilled labor. The growers need to make many decisions all the time on different aspects. So they want to reach a high yield with a very good quality. Of course, at the right moment on the market, so timing and market prediction are quite important. But at the same time, you also want to save on resources and therefore want to have a sustainable production and also save on cost with that. So balancing all these aspects is quite difficult. And we think that autonomous greenhouses, more artificial intelligence, might help to oversee all these difficult decisions. If we look at the greenhouse production, we already have quite some amount of digital information, but however, we also lack a lot of digital information. So we have climate computer gives you all the information with a high frequency. There is some information on fertigation, probably not all the information which could be useful. We definitely also have some data on the resources and the costs involved with that. But what about the very essential aspects of growing? The crop itself, all the data the growers obtain by observing the crop themselves, or pests and diseases. So only a few data in general are digitally available, and definitely more sensors could be used over there in order to reach this goal of yield quality and timing. So we think in this whole process, IE control could help. That brings me to our experiment, to our international second challenge on autonomous greenhouses. What did we do? We invited teams from all over the world to participate in this challenge. At the end, there were 6 teams, and they all got one of the compartments, equal compartments, at our location in Bleiswijk, the Netherlands. And we also had some staff operating things inside the greenhouse, but the teams had to operate these greenhouse compartments remotely and without entering the greenhouses anymore. So how does that look like? They had the same compartments, same equipment, same sensors. And usually a grower would make many decisions on the settings, on climate and irrigation, and make many decisions all day. However, in our case, we replaced that part with the AI teams to send automatically and remotely the settings to the greenhouse. So they were not allowed to enter anymore. That looks as follows. They made artificial intelligence algorithms, And they were placed somewhere around the world, in China, in Korea, at different places in the Netherlands, but not in Bleiswijk. So they sent the algorithms, they determined automatically all these set points. The set points were sent to via a digital interface, the API, through the process computer, and the process computer was then operating the actuators. So the ventilation, the artificial lighting, the CO2, the irrigation, the heating. And on the way back, the teams got all the sensor information, so the amount of light, the temperature, the CO2, and those kind of things in order to get that feedback information in their algorithms. The teams also had to determine crop handling parameters. However, you might be aware a tomato crop is not very suited yet for all robotic application. So we still had humans in the greenhouse receiving the information and acting accordingly. So here you can think about fruit pruning parameters, for example. So what did we do? We could not replace all the humans, but we could automate all kinds of decisions. So still some of our workers were in there making the wiring, like you see on the left-hand side, and also obtaining some data manually. The teams were also allowed to add additional sensors next to the standard ones, which I just showed you. So they have chosen to look at crop temperature, more light and distributed temperature and humidity information, subflumeters, camera systems in the visible range, but also in the thermal infrared range. So they have chosen to have different parameters in addition. Very important to mention is we worked with a cherry tomato crop. And the variety we have chosen is the variety Axiani, which is a small cherry tomato. You see it here on the picture, and it is quite a tasteful variety. Let's have a look at the results we could obtain and observe during this experiment. So like I said, we had 6 teams, we had 6 compartments, and so we ended up also with 6 different climate control strategies. And what you see on this picture here is temperature and the amount of heating use. We had 5 AI teams, and we had the 6 compartments to be operated by manual growers, Dutch growers, quite experienced. They were growing the reference compartment. And all the 5 AI teams were competing against each other and against this reference compartment. And I would like to point out that the gray line in all the figures would show what the growers have done. And I also would like to point out the green line, which is what the winning team had done. So maybe that's a good reference to compare things. We planted at the beginning of December, and we went for a half year until the end of May to produce cherry tomatoes. Here you can see that the growers maintained quite high temperatures all the time. You can also see that, for example, this blue line was apparently very reluctant to apply high temperatures, so they were very on the low end. And the winners, they had a high temperature strategy at the beginning, then went lower, and then I don't know why they did it, but at the end they boosted the temperature up to 30 degrees in average. This is, of course, this comes directly together with heating energy use, which we see on the right-hand side. And here you can see that this high temperature strategy of the growers also ended up with quite high heating energy use. And we can see that the winners apparently controlled the heating and the temperature they got in the greenhouse quite smartly, because they were quite saving on this heating energy. And of course, also the blue line was low in heating use. The question is, was the temperature maybe too low to reach a very high production? We will see at the end. Usually, if you control the different growth factors, you would like to have them in balance. High amount of temperature, high amount of light, high amount of CO2 together leads to, in general, a high production. Here on these figures, we see the lighting strategy, or the light strategy of the different teams. On the left-hand side, we see the daily light integral. So that is natural light and artificial light together. The teams were able to use as well HPS lamps and LED lamps in a mixture. And you can see that in Holland, we have quite low light levels in general in winter, so in December, January, and it goes up higher and with also longer days in May, June. If you look at the right-hand side, you see the amount of artificial light the teams used. And of course, that goes together with the amount of electricity used. Again, we can see that the growers and also the winning team, so the gray and the green line, were quite high in artificial light use in order to boost production. But we can also see that this blue line, the blue team, which was very low in temperature on the figures before, now have chosen to add a lot of light. We are not sure if that is a wise combination, but again, we will see that at the end. The third parameter, which is quite important for optimum growth, is of course CO2 and the CO2 strategy. What we can see here is the CO2 concentration maintained in the compartments on the left-hand side, and the CO2 dosage, so the amount given on the right-hand side. So also this goes together with the resource use. Here we can observe that the growers, the gray line, were quite reluctant with quite low CO2 concentrations at the beginning, and later on they boosted that, which ended in low CO2 dosage at the beginning, but at the end they had to give a lot of CO2. And the green team, so the winning team, was then quite in average. But we can also see that here the black team had very high concentrations and also very high dosage. So the question is, how does that affect the sustainability and also the costs related to that? And this is what we see in this figure here. This is the resource use efficiency. So for all the teams, we had a look at the heat energy used, the electricity used, the CO2 used, and the water and the nutrients. And what we can see here is that this low amount of heating, or the smart heating control of the green team, ended up in low total heat energy usage. We can also see that for the growers, the gray one, the heat energy use was quite high. This is what we could see also in these figures. We can see that the blue one, who was very high in artificial light use, also used a lot of electricity. And in general, we can observe that the winning team was quite saving in the resources used. They had a quite high resource use efficiency. Coming to the important part, which is of course the tomato production. This is where the teams could not save on costs, but earn money. And at the end, both together would give the net profit, and that was the goal, to optimize. So here we can see that from the beginning, the teams had different choices in stem density. They could make that choice at the beginning here, and you can see that most of the teams made a choice for relatively high stem densities, and only the blue one was reluctant. What is also quite interesting is that the growers, they maintained the same stem density all the time, So also with rising light levels. And then at the end, they decided to double the stems, which might be a very good strategy in order to boost production at the end. However, higher stem densities are also connected to higher labor costs. So that might, in the scope of this challenge, might not have been the wisest choice. You see that the winning team also was quite high in stem densities and also fruit densities, and also the black one. And you see that also back in production. We already focused on the growers and the green team. And we can see that for the black team, boosting CO2, also maintaining high fruit loads on the plants, gave them a good award in production. But like I said, it's not only production, it's also the prices for the production and the costs leading to the net profit. Have a look at the fruit quality and also the prices the teams could obtain. We observed the fruit quality all the time. We even did flavor measurements, but let's focus here on only the Brix value. And what we can see here is that there were certainly at the beginning quite some differences. And the Brix and the price for the product were related. And there was a difference in price for higher Brix. And there was a difference at the beginning of the season, where prices in general were much higher than at the end of the seasons, which would also reflect the market in practice. And that means that when you were good in quality at the beginning, you reached higher prices throughout the season. And here you see a difference between, for example, the winning team and also the growers, sorry for that. This is the total end result. So now we have a look at production times prices, min the resource use times the cost. And we can see that the green team, the winning team, had the highest net profit. They had the highest production, but also the lowest resource use and therefore costs. And we can see that although the growers had very high production, the costs which were involved with that production were much higher, and therefore they ended up with a much lower profit. We can also see that all 5 of the AI teams had a very good result. The question is then for us as organizers and also as a research team, what could teams have done better? So this is the result they did, but where could they have improved? And what could be the lessons learned also for traditional growers without making use of any AI? So we had to look at that, and for that, we used our models, which are greenhouse climate and crop production models. They are called cash flow and income. So what do these models do? They represent, in fact, a virtual environment of the tomato production. So it's a kind of digital virtual twin of the reality. Here is a picture how that looks like. So all the aspects of the greenhouse equipment and also the crops are involved in here. We use these models first. So after the challenge has finished, we use the models to put all the strategies the teams used into the model and see if the model could predict exactly the same values. So for example, can I predict with the model exactly the same amount of light and production, which we will see on the next slide. So this is only putting real data into the model and see if it really can reproduce what happened. And on the left-hand side, you can see that the model and the reality really had a good agreement in the amount of light we got in the greenhouses. on the right-hand side, we see the simulation and also the realized production. We did the same also for temperature and CO2 and crop management and all the other things. I don't want to show you, they are in good agreement. If you have that good agreement, you can change parameters. So you can use the model to have a performance analysis. And as also here, I just don't want to show you all the results, but focus on the lighting strategy. So we first had a look at what if you change the real lighting strategies the teams had into something different. So we first started with adding light and subtracting light. And here I want to show you what would have happened if the teams have applied 2 more lighting hours each day compared to the realized strategy. And what you see here is not the production, but directly the net profit, because you can imagine that if you add more light, it might end up in more production, but also in higher electricity use. And you would like to see where is the optimum for net profit. And this is what we see in this figure here. You can see the result on each day we added 2 more lighting hours and see if that would lead to a higher net profit. And what we can observe is, especially at the beginning, when this crop is quite small, this would not end in higher net profit. In contrary, it would end up in lower profit because already the plant is not able to intercept all the light. It just simply doesn't have enough leaves at the beginning. However, very soon in the season, although you have more natural light, adding more artificial light also would have ended and gained the teams, all the teams by the way, more net profit than they realized in the challenge. And this effect becomes smaller, of course, if natural light is getting more. What do we learn for the teams? We can see that the growers at the beginning had a quite good operation of artificial light. Then later on, they could have gained. So here the red curve is the growers. And we can also see that the winners could have gained already from quite the beginning, adding more light than they did. It would have been worthwhile to have a better production, and although it costs some electricity. So light seems to be a very important factor. We did the same exercise also with temperature and CO2, but there the sensitivities were much less than for light. Which brings me to some take-home messages. So what we learned here is all the AI teams outperformed the human reference, which is nice if you have such a challenge. But that doesn't mean the growers did a bad job. It's just in the scope of this challenge, apparently the AI teams did an even better job. We also have seen in the challenge that the crop management is very important for a good production, but also a good quality production. And as I showed, the lighting strategies, they could have been improved. I didn't show the figures on CO2 and temperature, but you have to believe me that there the effects were much less. In general, it is very important to have all the data objectively obtained and digitally available in a high frequency. And that is not always the case, especially if it comes to fruit harvest and all the crop data. There is many things are still manually obtained by growers. Only few of these parameters are digitally and objectively available. It is very important to have a good interpretation of the data though. We also saw that many teams added sensors, and then the question is, what do you do with that information and how do you implement it in the strategy? And maybe more to the future, if you really would like to call it autonomous greenhouse, of course, it's only autonomous if really no labor and no human would come inside the greenhouse. if you want to reach it or not. But in that case, you would need more robotics to replace that labor. And anyway, I think we can conclude that you need excellent human labor in order to also to combine with the automatic decisions. If you look more to the future, what is there and what is still needed? So I think on the field of sensors, which we can see here, it's very important also to have all the crop measurements, digital, robust, interpretable data. It definitely also helps to have good algorithms, but also models for prediction and decision support of the growers. And what we also have seen is if you want to do steps in the future, it might also help to adapt the crop architecture. For example, with breeding, having a different cropping system in order to also see exactly and obtain all the information and make autonomous growing more easy. And robots I mentioned before. There are also some other challenges towards autonomous greenhouses, which I mention over here, which have nothing to do with the technology. It's also the, so next to the availability of data, it's also the ownership and sharing of data, joint platforms. Do we want that in the future? Is it possible to connect not only the production data, but connect it also to the breeding, so the phenotyping, and also to the market information? Who is reliable if a greenhouse algorithm is growing the tomatoes? And do we accept that as growers, as consumers, to have autonomous greenhouses in the future? So these answers still have to be found in the future. And maybe a few of the speakers who are coming after me can give some contribution to that. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank all the sponsors, all the teams, all the jury members, our reference growers, and of course, all my colleagues to making all this possible. And you see on this presentation to the right-hand side, a link to the data set, the underlying data set of this challenge. You can download it and use the data yourself. With that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hemming. I'll open it up to questions. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So I'll take our first question. It's from Rob DeVries. The question is, what is steered by the teams? Are the vents, heating pipes controlled, or is it just the temperature in the greenhouse? Do they have direct, I guess the question is, do they have direct control over, say, pipe temperature, or is it just the temperature set point?
No, they control the temperature set point for heating and ventilation separately, but it's the set points they put inside. And I guess the background is that useful, and should that not change in the future? I would say, yeah, it might be useful to change that in the future, but for this challenge, we had to use the setup like we have in the greenhouse with a traditional climate computer, and that was the only way we could do that. We didn't take over the role of the process computer. Okay, I see a question. How can I get involved in such a challenge? Maybe, yeah, we are hoping to organize a third challenge. We are trying to prepare for that. So we would like to do it, but we need sponsorship for that. And if we are able to get that sponsorship, there will be a third challenge. And there is a public invitation for everyone who can subscribe and participate. It's open for everyone all around the world.
Great. There's two more questions, so I'll go from the top. We've got one from Bill Chuang. It says, thank you for the presentation. Two questions. What do you think is the big value of AI in greenhouses?
Yeah, we still don't have complete answer to that. So we think that the value definitely is in self-learning, adapting, and especially on all the parameters which are difficult to catch. So that's crop parameters. It might also be pest and diseases. So a lot of research work is especially going in that direction to use deep learning algorithms on pictures to catch the parameters automatically in there and then use it also in greenhouse control. So I think there is the biggest value.
And the second part of that question is, what is your formula for AI? I guess that was determined.
Yeah, that was very different from used by the different teams. So they were free to choose different algorithms. And to be honest, all of them had some expert policies in the loop.
Another question, were labor costs considered?
Yes, we had labor costs also included in the net profit, even though I didn't show all the data, but yes, and labor costs were related to stem density and yeah, the traditional labor.
Okay, another question, did the teams have different pest and disease management strategies, and how did those strategies impact the results?
Yeah, we excluded this factor. It's a very good question. So we took care ourselves as organizers of all the pests and diseases, and we must say we also had the same experience in the first challenge. There were no large differences, and we took care with the biological control whenever needed.
Okay. Next question is, do you think growers had made better decisions than the AI teams based on their experience in farms as growers had more production?
Well, the goal of the challenge was to maximize net profit. And if you look at that goal, no, the growers did not make better decisions. They made very good decisions to reach a high production, but they didn't make the smartest decisions or the optimum decisions in doing that at the low resource use. And it's a greenhouse system is a very complex system. And especially in this complexity, we think that algorithms can help growers to make decisions. I'm now talking about autonomous control, but you can use these algorithms also to show information in a better way to growers and let them make decisions.
Okay, another question. Was there training data available before the challenge, or were all the strategies learned on the fly?
Learning on the fly is very difficult because then you have a one-shot learning. That is very difficult. What we did, we opened up our simulator, like our virtual greenhouse, our digital twin for also the greenhouses upfront, for the teams upfront. So they were able to use the simulation environment to obtain artificial training data. Some of the teams used that, and some of the teams also used own data sets and did it in a different way.
Next question we have is, there's a question about whether there was differences in fertilizer use between the teams.
Yeah, there was. The teams were able, I didn't show any data on that, the teams were able to mix their fertilizers, and they got every second week, they got an analysis like you would also do in practice, and then they could also adapt the mixture, and they were able to adapt the EC level continuously. However, we expected to have a very good correlation between EC and Brix, which you see in some of the tomato varieties, but with this variety, we could not clearly observe that. Not within the parameter field the teams played.
Okay, another question. Thanks for the presentation. And due to sensors being a key part in this project, how do you think, how important do you think it is to measure parameters at different heights in the crop?
We think sensors are key in the challenge. At least you need the standard sensors which we had, which might be enough for a small compartment, but on larger compartments, we definitely think you would need more information. We had a lot of discussions also with the teams and their experience, which are the key sensors you used in your algorithm and which you could not get rid of. And they all had a different answer. But I think we make the conclusion that crop sensors, so getting more information on the crop. So for example, light penetration on different heights, crop temperature on different heights. So observing more parameters on the crop directly were very helpful.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I'll go with the first asked. Do you have expectations about the results if more irrigation control is part of the AI?
Yes, we think so. Also there is a lot of discussion, but I just give also my personal opinion. We scarcely have information on, well, not so much on the amount of water, those kind of things I think are quite optimized over here. We also have a recirculation system, so we give water and nutrients, we recirculate that, catch it at the end, recirculate it. But I think much more information in the root zone could help to make better decisions, and certainly in suboptimal conditions, maybe not at the average Dutch grower, they have already a lot of information, but I think in general, getting information and using AI for the control strategy would help here.
Great, thanks. I think we're out of time for questions. I do want to remind people, because I see some questions about the data set, the slides will be available on the Canadian Greenhouse Conference website afterwards, and all the links to the data are in the slides.
And otherwise, www.autonomousgreenhouses.nl will give you all the links and information.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hemming.
Thank you.